What paranormal experience convinced you that ghosts are real? Part 2. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stopped by my husband's Nana's to pee while on my lunch break. House was empty because the power had gone out the night before, so Nan was staying elsewhere. I entered the bathroom and hear, "Who's there?" in an older man's voice. Now I know there is nobody in this house, but I went looking anyway. I guess his granddad's ghost just wanted to know who the hell was going pee. I had other unexplained encounters earlier in my life, but this one was undeniable. Whenever me or my siblings are home alone downstairs, we hear footsteps pacing back and forth upstairs. Whenever we get to our stairway though, the footsteps stop abruptly. Also, sometimes we get home from vacation to find one or two of our windows open. We live in a safe neighborhood, so it's not really a problem, but my mom is convinced that this is the work of ghosts because we obviously would never leave our windows open before going on a road trip. I never believed in the supernatural, but a friend begged me to try a Ouija board, so I did. The triangle was moving around when we were asking questions. I still wasn't convinced, so I asked the so-called spirit to do something to prove you're real, and suddenly the vacuum turned on by itself. Just don't know why that turned on like that. Baffles me. My friend had insisted that his parents' house was haunted for years while we were growing up. His sister told stories about a ghost that would turn her TV on at nighttime or do something like share her bed while she was in it, but I never really believed them. One day, they asked me if I would house sit while they were all on vacation. It's where my drum kit lived at the time, so I was always there anyways. We were in a band. So I didn't think anything of it and said yes. And that was when my first and only paranormal experience happened. I'll never forget it. I'd slept in on a sunny day. It was about 11 in the morning, and I'd nowhere to go. I was laying awake in a bed in their spare bedroom upstairs, knowing full well that I was alone in the house, when all of a sudden, the sound of an adult man singing opera filled the entire house for about 30 seconds. It was extremely loud and completely unignorable. I will never forget how scared I was, and after the singing stopped, my heart was absolutely beating out of my chest. I got dressed and sprinted out of the house as fast as I could, and didn't go back to finish my house-sitting duties after that. I figured the ghost had it handled. I was convinced before this, but this made me undoubtedly believe. Was staying over at my friend's house, and we were asleep in the living room. Suddenly, we both wake up, sit up, and look at the clock completely in sync. It was exactly 5 a.m. Then his dog starts barking down the dark hallway at the stairs. We looked over at each other in shock and ducked under the blankets, LOL. Or maybe the time in the same house where it was early in the morning and we heard walking upstairs, all the way to the stairs, down the stairs, and the bathroom door slammed extremely hard. No one was upstairs. No windows, AC, or anything that could have slammed the door with that force. I hated that house with a passion. The upstairs and the bathroom were very unsettling. I have a handful of other stories from that place. It's the sole reason I believe. When my wife and I were house hunting, we went to a house that was in a pretty busy part of town, but sort of tucked back out of the way from the main road. The outside was nice, big property, beautiful trees, but the backyard backed up to the main road so you could hear the traffic. We were turned off by it, but we all had to drive a bit to get there and said, let's at least go see it. So we walked through. The owners had already vacated for the most part other than staged furniture for showing. The upstairs was meh. Old carpets, outdated wallpaper, ancient kitchen. We weren't impressed, but we kept moving through, knowing we could talk down the price based on what we saw. The last thing we had to see was the basement, which you go to through the back of the kitchen. When I got to the top of the steps, I felt something. Maybe it was spidey sense, I don't know. I'm not really a sense things kind of person. My wife is very open to the supernatural and paranormal, and she felt the same thing. I stood on the top step and just felt this weird feeling. The feeling is hard to describe, but it legit made me stop in place. It was a feeling I've never had since. It was like I was walking into a dense invisible fog that you could feel around you. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I just felt everything in my body saying, something is not right down here. But we walked down the steps, and it only got heavier as we went. When I got to the bottom of the steps, it felt like I was wrapped in a heavy-weighted vest and walking through sand. I looked at my wife and mouthed, "Do you feel that?" And the look on her face was of just pure dread. She was pale white, and she was obviously feeling the same thing. She stayed at the bottom of the stairs and went, "I'm going back up. I don't think we need to see anything else. Let's go," before turning around and going upstairs. The realtor wanted to keep looking, so I moved through with her thinking we'd be quick. We opened a door, saw where the washer and dryer were, looked at the full bathroom, the sliding glass door out to the backyard. Then she goes, "I have no idea what this door is," and opened it up. It was a flush panel, heavy metal door and frame that were painted to match the wall. We both thought maybe it was a fire safe since it had such a heavy door and there were multiple locks on the outside. I mean, heavy locks. We opened it, and the room inside was maybe 5 foot by 5 foot and was completely made of poured concrete, but it didn't look professionally done to me. It looked sort of sloppy and not quite smoothed out properly like a professional installation. It had 4 metal support poles in each corner of the room, about 3 inches from the walls, and they had clearly been recently painted white. The concrete floor and ceiling were painted gray, and there was a new metal drain covering that was dead center of the room. The walls, I swear to God, those walls looked like they had been filled with wall putty, like they were covering holes, but they weren't hole marks, like they threw a glob on there and then smoothed it out. It was a long drawn-out patches. The first thought I had was, that looks like scratch marks being covered up. I looked at the walls and the poles, and you could clearly see there had been something rubbing against the poles, like the metal had scratches in the poles themselves. The feeling I had when I was looking in that room, it made me fucking sick to my stomach, like some evil demonic shit went on in there. If I had just seen a picture of the room, I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but being there, in person, the way that room made me feel, it was like something was kept in there. Something alive that wasn't meant to be in there. I could have easily looked at a picture, even if someone pointed things out and been like, maybe it was a BDSM room for the owners. But it wasn't a feeling of, this room was for mutual enjoyment, if that makes sense. I closed the door, and when it shut, I just got this overwhelming sense of panic, of fear, of fucking run, and I could feel shivers going up and down my spine. It was like something was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. It wasn't my realtor. She was standing next to me, speculating the room could have been a makeshift fire safe. But the overall feelings and impression was that it definitely was not for good intentions. We started to leave, and we heard what sounded like a low moan, like someone was in pain, but there was nowhere for that noise to come from. We could see the entire basement from where we were, and there was nothing. So we just went, maybe the wind outside, and started to move upstairs. We made it to maybe the 4th and 2nd stair respectively, and the door to the basement that had previously been open and held open by a door jamb slammed shut behind us, like someone took the thing and used their full force to just slam it closed. The realtor looked back at me and goes, "I guess the air kicked on and forced it closed?" I was like, "Yeah, that's probably it." And we made our way up the stairs. When my wife and I were leaving, we sat in the car for a moment, and I looked over at her and went, "Please tell me you felt that too." She goes, "Babe, I'm so glad you couldn't see what I saw." I asked her what she saw, and she said that the moment I got downstairs, there was a black thing, not a cloud or image or anything, but there was just a black transparent shadow behind me. She said the thing was huge, completely dwarfed me, like it went floor to ceiling in the basement that was pretty tall, and it was wide, maybe 2 of me standing side by side. She said when she saw it, she froze, and that's why she tried to get me to go upstairs with her. It was something not friendly. She said, "I was afraid that thing was going to try and harm you if it could." That whole experience made me change my views on paranormal. This had to be around 2009 to 2010 in the Thumb region of Michigan. One of my good friends bought a huge Italianite farmhouse built in 1876. Well, naturally, we explored the house. It sat empty for a long time. We found a dried-up cistern under the floor, but it was filled with children's shoes. That was creepy, but whatever. When we started to demo, that is what things started to happen. Nothing crazy, but the lights would turn on even though we know for a fact we turned them off, and the doors would slam. My friend put some crosses up in the house, and whatever was in that house did not like them. They would get knocked off the walls almost every night, and we started to hear footsteps. The final straw was when this thing growled into my buddy's ear while we were sleeping. He left the house right then and there. I have never seen him scared before, as he is a bigger guy and not easily frightened. My friend ended up moving out completely that day and listed the house. It didn't really convince me of the existence of ghosts, but to this day, I still can't explain what happened. I was at my then stepdad's house and his daughter came over for the summer from another country. I was 11 or 12, I think. We were running around the house and the yard as I was chasing her. At some point, we get out of the main door, inside the house, in the front of the door. There was this white curtain going all the way to the ground. So in order to get out of the door, you had to move the curtain a bit and then open the door. I did that, pulled the curtain back, covering the door, and then closed the door behind me. 2 or 3 seconds later, something comes slamming onto the door from the inside. The door had 2 windows, one on the upper part and one on the lower part, so you could see the curtain behind. As I heard the slamming sound, I saw the curtain being pushed on the glass like someone tripped and fell onto the door. At first I thought it was the girl, but she was in the yard when I watched behind me. I then asked my parents if they were there at that moment, but both of them were in another side of the house. I got pretty spooked out, especially because the days before I kept getting these weird, creepy vibes in the house, like something was there. One night, I woke up to the big pendulum clock in the living room ringing midnight, and I felt this overwhelming dread I couldn't explain. I didn't live there, as that was more like a holiday house next to the sea, but that house had a very unsettling, quiet atmosphere, and it didn't help that it was very big. I never met my grandfather from my mother's side. He died 2 months after my older brother was born. When I was 5 years old, my mother, my brother, and I were living at my grandma's house, where my grandfather had a small studio. The studio was always locked because when he was young, he hunted deer, and his rifles were stored in the studio inside a vault. My grandmother kept the key to the studio at all times. There was this day when my grandma was away on a trip, and my brother and I were at home with my mom, but she was on the other side of the house while we were playing upstairs. We decided to go to the studio, so we knocked the door and an old man opened us. He was smoking a pipe while writing something, and we talked about the many curious objects that were in the studio. My mother went to check on us when she heard noises coming from the studio. The door was locked. She managed to get us out through one of the windows that faced the stairs, and once we were outside, I asked her who was the old man smoking and writing in the studio. Her face turned white, but very excited. She answered me, he was my grandpa. To this day, almost 20 years have passed, and me and my brother vividly remember that moment. Sometimes we talk about it in family reunions. This is particularly special to me because it was the way I met my grandpa. My dad died 11 and a half years ago. Whenever I was sick, when I was little, he'd come in to check on me and sit at the foot of my bed and touch my foot or ankle. Sometimes I was awake, sometimes I wasn't. About 4 years ago, I was very, very ill with the flu. In the middle of the night, I felt my bed move slightly and then felt something touch my foot or ankle. I know it was my dad checking on me. In a previous job, we had an intern from South America. One day, we were taking a break together, and somehow we got to talking about paranormal stuff. Apparently, their grandparent was some sort of shaman, and they had inherited the gift of being able to see and communicate with spirits. They told me they had seen 2 spirits following me around and described my late grandmother and best friend to a T. There was literally no way for the intern to know what they looked like, nor had I ever even mentioned they had died. They said they hadn't told me about them before because they figured I'd A, freak out and or think they were crazy, but the day felt the time was right. The day? It would have been my best friend's 25th birthday. I've always been pretty open-minded about stuff like this, so I wasn't really freaked out. It actually comforts me to think that 2 people very dear to me keep an eye on me from time to time, even though they're gone. As a kid, I shared my room with my brother. Our room was designed such that our closet was built into a wall that was extended inwards toward the room. I know, bad description. Think of a square, but in the middle of one side add a divider. Now, the bathroom was on one side of this wall, and the foot of my bed was on the other side. I never went to the bathroom at night because I once saw a woman in white, dirty clothes, a lot of stains, long hair, and burnt skin, who did nothing but stand there. Even as a kid, I thought it was just me being afraid of the dark and my mind playing tricks on me. Anyway, I could never see the corner where the bathroom was without getting up because of the wall in between. I used to stay in my bed and just hold my bladder for years, simply because I was too scared to get up and peer over the corner. About 10 plus years later, I'm sitting in our new home using my phone, and I hear my brother tell my mom, translated to English but trying to keep it as accurate as possible, "As a kid, I used to think our house was haunted because I thought I kept seeing this woman with burnt skin, long hair, and white clothes with a lot of stains standing near our bathroom door. Must have been recurring nightmares." My parents have a china cabinet that has lighting fixtures inside, so if you wanted, the dishware inside could be illuminated. Despite never being used, the cord always remained plugged into an electrical socket. Growing up, I was always told stories about how after the death of one of my grandmothers, the lights would turn on every so often and roses could be smelt in the room from the cabinet was in. One of my grandmother's favorite scents, I believe. I was too young to remember any of this. Last year, I was walking through my town's cemetery. I walked this route quite regularly to avoid a busy road. I was in the oldest section of the cemetery where people had been buried 200 or 300 years ago. For a while, I walked slowly, figuring out how old each person was when they died and reading the last names to see if I recognized any. After returning home that evening, the china cabinet's lights were on. By that point in time, no one knew I had walked through the cemetery, nor was there a power outage, earthquake, or some other occurrence that could possibly explain the lights being on. The lights hadn't been turned on in years, and this was now the second house and third electrical socket the cabinet has been plugged into. I think the time I spent at the graves that day might have caused something to follow me home. I stopped going through the cemetery as much, and if I did, avoided doing what I did that day. It hasn't happened since. In the weeks that followed, my mom and I smelt roses despite not having any in the house, nor anyone using a rose-scented fragrance. When I was a teenager, we moved into a house and immediately started experiencing some spooky things. I was coming down the stairs into the living room a couple days after moving in and saw a foot standing by the window. It moved and disappeared, and the vertical blinds moved at the same time. A few weeks later, I saw a figure watching me from one of the rooms when I walked down the hall. It had no features. It was just blank and flesh-colored. Looked similar to Slender Man but shorter, around my height of 5'5". This was long before Slender Man was even a thing in pop culture. One night, I was going to sleep and I closed my eyes and saw demonic-looking angry eyes looking back at me inside my eyelids. Had one of many panic attacks while living in that house. The whole thing culminated in me and my dog being attacked while my parents were out of the house. I was sitting at the computer and something started throwing objects at me. A glass jar, my dad's hairbrush, an RC car with the batteries taken out of it. I got my dog on a leash and ran outside and called my family to come home. When we went downstairs, the place was trashed. The hairbrush that was thrown at me was now completely across the room and broken in half. We lived there for about 15 months total. A few months after the attack, my parents sold the place and we moved. I never had a paranormal experience again. Anything else weird that happened always had a logical explanation, but there was nothing any of us could do to explain this. Also, almost all of this happened during broad daylight except the eyes. It was never during a time when I was feeling creeped out. It was always unexpected. This may get buried, but it's been hushed in my family, but I think me and my grandma can see spirits. It's not all the time, and we don't have any family history of psychosis. Some of the creepy things I did as a kid convinced me. I remember when I was 6 or 7, and I usually get too really animated and excited every time my mom drove past a graveyard. She told me hearing me from the back seat say, "Mom, look, a graveyard. Look at what's going on over there." And there was no one out there. Fuck you. Alright. Shit. I got a client coming up. Hold on.